What does the most dangerous being in Middle-earth actually do for 5,000 years, alone, in the dark, with no orders, no master, and no war left to fight? And when the dwarves finally dug it out, when it killed 2 kings in 2 years and emptied the greatest kingdom in Middle-earth, why did it conquer nothing, march nowhere, and answer to no one? Because that second question is the one nobody asks. Everyone knows what the Balrog is. Almost nobody stops to ask what it was doing down there. And the answer, once you assemble it from the Silmarillion, the appendices, and one devastating line in the 2 towers, is stranger and sadder than any fan theory. Quick note on sources before we start. This one is almost entirely book and deep lore. Silmarillion, Appendix A, Appendix B, and I'll flag the film beats as we go. And if you've seen my video on why Gandalf feared Moria, that was the Fellowship's side of the door. This is the other side. This is the creature's side. Start with what it is, because everything follows from this. The Silmarillion, Valaquenta, so this is scripture-level lore, none of it in the films, tells us the Balrogs were Maia, spirits from before the world, the same order of being as Gandalf, as Saruman, as Sauron himself. Melkor corrupted them in the days of his splendor, and they became demons of fire wrapped in living shadow. And I want you to hold on to the rule I keep coming back to on this channel. For these spirits, everything costs. Power spent shaping the world doesn't come back. Remember that, because this entire story is about a creature that stopped spending. And in the First Age, still the Silmarillion, still nowhere near the films, this thing's kind had a resume that should frighten you. When Ungoliant, the spider horror so vast that Morgoth was afraid of her, turned on her master and wrapped him in webs, it was his scream that brought the Balrogs boiling up out of the deep places where they lay hidden, and they drove her off. The thing that terrified the original Dark Lord got chased away by these. Their lord Gothmog cut down Fëanor, arguably the mightiest elf who ever lived, on the borders of Morgoth's own land. Balrogs were not monsters in the ecosystem. They were the elite of the oldest army in the world. Then the War of Wrath ends the First Age. The host of the West comes out of the uttermost west. The war is so violent that Beleriand, an entire subcontinent, breaks and sinks into the sea, and Morgoth falls forever. And the Silmarillion hands us the whole of what follows in a single line. The Balrogs were destroyed, save some few that fled and hid. Read those 2 verbs again. Fled, hid, that's it. That is the complete strategic doctrine of every Balrog that survived the end of the world, stated once in passing. And one of those few is about to follow that doctrine for 5,000 years. Appendix A tells us, in a phrase that has launched 1,000 forum wars we'll get to, that this one came flying from Thangorodrim while its master's fortress fell, and went to ground at the foundations of the earth. It did not wait to see how the war ended. It ran while the war was ending. And look at where it chose to dig in. Under the misty mountains, beneath 3 peaks the dwarves call Barazinbar, Zirak-Zigil, and Bundushathur. Directly above its hiding place sits Khazad-dum, the oldest and greatest dwelling of the dwarves, founded by Durin the Deathless before the First Age was even over. The demon and the dwarves are neighbors for thousands of years, and neither one knows the other is there. So the question in the title, what was it doing? Count what it slept through, because the list is genuinely absurd. The rings of power are forged 1 mountain range away. It sleeps. Sauron rises, builds Barad-dûr, wages war on the elves. It sleeps. Numenor, the mightiest civilization of men in history, rises, falls, and is drowned beneath the sea. It sleeps. The last alliance marches past. Sauron loses the ring. An age of the world ends. It sleeps. Every single item on that list is an apocalypse. It slept through all of them. This is a being that watched the world break once from the losing side and drew one conclusion: never be found. And here's the thing Tolkien does that I need you to notice because it's deliberate. He gives this creature nothing, no name. Durin's Bane is what its victims called it. No voice, it never speaks one word in the entire legendarium. No goal, no plan, no interior life of any kind. Tolkien is completely silent about what it wanted, and I'm not going to fill that silence in for him, but I'll tell you what the silence does. Every other evil in this story wants something. Sauron wants the ring. Saruman wants to be Sauron. Gollum wants his precious. The Balrog is the only power in Middle-earth that wants nothing at all. It doesn't scheme, it doesn't hunger, it persists. And there is something uniquely horrifying about evil with no appetite, because evil that wants something can be predicted, baited, bargained with. This just is. Then comes the year 1980 of the Third Age, and the tragedy is that nobody does anything wrong. The mithril veins under Barad-dûr run deep, and they are running thin. The dwarves of King Durin VI are the richest they have ever been, and it's mithril doing it. So they follow the vein down and down. And in 1980, Appendix A tells us, they break through into the dark, where something has been sleeping since Beleriand sank beneath the sea, longer than any king in Durin's line has reigned. And they wake it. It kills Durin that same year. It kills his son Nine the year after. And then the dwarves, after 2 kings in 2 years, walk away from the greatest mansion their people ever built. Khazad-dûm, the Dwarodelf, becomes Moria, the Black Pit. The name change is the obituary. And now watch what the Balrog does with its victory, because this is the beat that unlocks the whole video. It has just emptied the most defensible fortress in Middle-earth. It has halls, forges, armories, mithril beyond counting. Sauron is stirring in the world again and would presumably love a First Age demon on the payroll. And the Balrog does nothing. It raises no army. It sends no word to anyone. Orcs eventually move into Moria, and Sauron's creatures shelter in its shadow, and its presence conveniently keeps the dwarves from ever coming home. But the text never once shows it commanding them, joining anyone, or setting foot outside. It sat out the entire War of the Ring happening above its head. It didn't conquer Khazad-dûm. It went back to sleep inside its own accident. You want proof of how completely it owned that darkness without lifting a finger. Appendix A again, and this is a beat the films never touch. 200 years before Fellowship, the dwarves fight the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, and it ends at the Battle of Azanul-Bizar in the valley outside Moria's East Gate, the bloodiest day in dwarf history, and they win it. Dain Ironfoot, still practically a boy, kills Azog at the very door, and then Dain, fresh off the greatest kill of the war, standing at the threshold of his people's homeland, which his people have just bled a generation to reach, looks through that gate into the shadow, and he turns around, and he tells Thrain that no dwarf will enter, because beyond the shadow it is still waiting. The victorious army stood at the open door of everything they wanted, and one look into the dark was enough. They buried their dead and left. The Balrog didn't even have to wake up. And a century later, hope tries one more time. This is the story the Fellowship walks into the middle of. Balin leads a colony back into Moria in 2989. For 5 years, it actually works. They hold chambers, they find treasure, they start to rebuild. Book readers know how we learn what happened next, because it's one of the most haunting devices Tolkien ever used. The Fellowship finds the colony's own chronicle, the Book of Mazarbul, and Gandalf reads the final page out loud in the dark, surrounded by the skeletons of the men who wrote it. The final entry trails off in a desperate scrawl. We cannot get out. Drums. Drums in the deep. And then the last words ever written in Khazad-dûm. They are coming. 5 years. That's how long you get in the Balrog's house before the house notices. Now, the Fellowship and the confrontation. I covered the Fellowship side of this in the Gandalf video. The dread, the door duel in Mazarbul, the naming on the bridge. Go watch that for Gandalf's half. From the creature's side, here is the only part that matters. After 5,000 years of successful hiding, the thing that finally stands in its way is one of its own kind. The standoff on the bridge, book version, is framed as theology, a servant of the secret fire against the flame of Udun. Two Maia, two spirits from the same music, one who spent 5 millennia hiding from judgment and one who was sent back into the world specifically to spend himself. In the book, Gandalf tells it twice that it cannot pass. The film's "You shall not pass" is a Jackson tweak that became the most quoted line in fantasy cinema.
You shall not pass!
And honestly, the adaptation earned that one. But the fall is where Tolkien twists the knife, and the film compresses almost all of this. The full version is in The Two Towers, in Gandalf's own account. They fall for what feels like an age into deep water at the roots of the mountain, and the water quenches the Balrog's fire, turns this demon of flame into a strangling, slimy horror in the dark. They fight through tunnels gnawed by nameless things older than Sauron himself, things Gandalf refuses to describe to anyone, ever, and when Gandalf declines to tell you something, believe him. And then, watch this, because this is the entire video in one image. The Balrog runs. It flees up the endless stair from the deepest dungeon toward the highest peak, with Gandalf hunting it the whole way. The creature whose one doctrine, whose single answer to existence for 5,000 years was flee and hide, is fleeing again. Except this time, for the first time since the host of the West came, something is fast enough to follow. It escaped the wrath of the Valar. It could not escape one exhausted old man with a broken hat. They come out at Durin's Tower on the peak of Xiraxagil, and there they fight the Battle of the Peak, and Appendix B lets you date it, the 23rd to the 25th of January, 2 days, wreathed in lightning, so that people far away thought they were watching a thunderstorm sitting on the mountain. And Gandalf throws down his enemy, and it breaks the mountainside where it falls. The thing that hid at the roots of the mountains dies on top of one, in daylight, seen for miles. Tolkien does not do accidents. That's a sentence, carried out. Quick sidebar, because I am legally required. The wings. The book's text, Bridge of Khazad-dum chapter, first says the shadow around it reached out like 2 vast wings, which is a simile, and then a few paragraphs later, same scene, same standoff, says its wings spread from wall to wall, which is not. 50 years of fandom civil war over one paragraph, and Appendix A's flying from Thangorodrim gets dragged into it every time. All I'll say is, it fell off a bridge, and it fell off a mountain, and on neither occasion did flapping enter the equation. Don't at me. And I want to be fair to the adaptations before we close, because this creature has been treated with real love on screen. Jackson's Balrog is one of the great designs in film history. Weta leaned all the way into shadow and flame, a furnace wearing a silhouette. And the film's cave troll spearing Frodo, book readers, it's a huge orc chieftain in the text, sets up the same devastating irony Tolkien built. The mithril coat that saves the ring-bearer's life is made of the exact metal the dwarves were digging for when they woke the thing. The treasure that destroyed Khazad-dum is what keeps Frodo alive long enough to end the age. Even the Rings of Power understood the assignment. Its one glimpse of the Balrog is the creature dead asleep beneath a mithril vein, disturbed by a single leaf drifting down into the dark and catching fire in front of it. One leaf. That's the margin the whole Third Age was resting on. So here's the answer to the question we started with. What was it doing under Moria for 5,000 years? It was doing the only thing it ever chose for itself, not being found. It never wanted the kingdom. it emptied. It never wanted Sauron's war. It watched the world break once, from the losing side, and decided that existence meant hiding. And its plan worked flawlessly for longer than most civilizations in Middle-earth lasted, until the one people more patient than a sleeping demon came following a vein of silver with pickaxes. It fled the ruin of the world and buried itself at the roots of a mountain, and the mountain is what they threw it down from.